Hey, well, thank you all for coming. We are delighted to have Dr. Christine Kwok, or do you go by Dr. Liu?
So my doctor name is Lou, my married name. So my legal name is Kwok. So if you
Okay.
guys type me at UT, my email, the reason I even put the Kwok in there is my email name is Christine.Kwok. So if anybody's ever looking
Oh,
for me, want to connect and or say hey, that's why. But yeah, so everybody on campus will know me as Lou, the
okay.
doctor name, but just
Okay.
Christine.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So today we're gonna talk about the biblical view on suffering.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Kyle. It's good to see you. Good to meet you over Zoom. Thank you for the invite. Kyle was so kind. He gave me several months headway of can you talk about suffering? And I was like, wow, that is such a huge topic. But I think I'm grateful. I think we all have suffering or will have suffering in this life. So it's a common theme, especially in pandemic. I just thought it was a really a very one that touched my heart. It's a topic actually interesting. I've actually gotten a chance to share about at our church before, and I'll kind of share why. So I know you guys are all PowerPointed out. I thought maybe some of the pictures would be interesting to you because there's a little bit of a medical crazy case for my son. So I thought I would share that as an intro. Is it okay if I hit share screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right, cool. Let me. So bear with me. Do y'all see the main slide? Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, so I actually titled it a crazy title. I called it Suffering in the Light of Glory. And it'll get there. So follow my rabbit trail. Feel free to interrupt if you guys have any comments or anything. It was supposed to be really casual and maybe not even PowerPointed, but and the more I thought about it, I thought some pictures might hopefully give encouragement. The first ones might scare you a little bit. So bear with me. So the agenda, not that we should have an agenda, but I need to organize my thoughts. I thought my son's name is Micah and he's a little sufferer. He's the one that does the suffering. We're the ones that are along for the ride. I'll share a little story about him or his story. My daughter's name is Abby. He's 9. She's 6. So how Abby, a normally developing child, lives with a pretty handicapped brother. And why is there suffering in light of our physical world, but spiritually, why is there suffering? And what does that have to do with glory and specifically the glory of God? So, one of the quotes from my favorite author, C.S. Lewis, he says, "It takes courage to live through suffering, and it takes honesty to observe it." So, I will confess that any honesty or any courage that I have is really from the Lord. But I do want to honestly share with you guys some of the struggles that our family we've had in the last couple of years, and hopefully it'll encourage you. So, my husband and I were married in 2011, and I had just returned 2 years from living in southern China in Macau. I had gone on a 2-year post-residency program directly out of residency to Macau, China through Samaritan's Purse. Some of you all might have heard that missions agency, but they send residents who want to go in the missions field like right after residency. You can apply, and they send about 13 or 14 post-residents. They fund you, and they just send you, and they match you with places that may have a need. So I was there doing medical education as a platform for the gospel, doing some rural disaster relief medicine. We're kind of a hub for travel to Southeast Asia. So a lot of teams would come through and we'd kind of just, go on trips pretty much every month for, a couple days to a few weeks at a time. Was doing some really cool stuff, like everything I could ever think of doing. I feel like I've done in family medicine. It was a really exciting time. Did some work with human trafficking outreach, with refugees actually in the Macau area. And then really, being a part of just seeing family medicine develop in China, actually in a rapid pace. So there was really exciting times. So I actually came back. I was single then. I came back to Austin, Texas, to do an OB fellowship in the hopes of developing an OB program for the residency there. And then I met my husband Kenny in the picture, goofy guy in the picture. We known each other for years. Had done led church youth group and stuff. And I was in med school in New Orleans. And he told me, he's like, "Hey, I'm interested in missions. I'll go with you." So we got married pretty quick, and we ended up getting pregnant with Micah pretty quick. We had taken a year or two to try to support raise for him, for us to go. So I took a teaching job at the Baylor Family Medicine Residency. It used to be at Garland. Now it's in Dallas. Our plans were to leave in about no more than 2 years. When I got hired, I said, I will be here in the US for 2 years. But God had some other plans. You can see how big my belly was. That was like probably about 32 weeks. So this is what we got. So I had a very record-breaking baby at Children's Medical Center. He was 14 pounds, 4 ounces, 35 and 5 weeks. His body was IUGR, but his head was ginormous. We were told at the get-go at about 24 weeks. I was ultrasounded then, went to a routine OB, and said, hey, let's just ultrasound you again. You're kind of big. And so they ultrasounded me. And the technician kind of went, and I said, oh, hydrocephalus. And she goes, oh, you see that? I said, yeah, massive hydrocephalus, even at 24 weeks. And so it was interesting. She actually turned around. I was a little over 24 weeks. She wrote a little thing on a piece of paper and handed it to me. And it was a phone number in, I think, Kansas or one of the K states, Kentucky or Kansas. And she said, hey, you can get a late term abortion at 24 weeks. Here it is. And I told her, I said, I was kind of a little stunned at the time, but at least my mouth was working. And I said, no matter what, he's our kid and he's a gift from God still. With hydrocephalus. My husband was working in the ER that day. I had to wait till nighttime to tell him. I didn't want to bother him in the ER. So I had never seen my husband cry. That was the first time. I'd known him about 10 years, never saw him shed a tear. But that was a really hard day. And, I'm not much of a crier. He isn't either, but we were both boohooing quite a bit that day. And my biggest thing actually in telling him, I wasn't so afraid of the hydrocephalus, though I probably should have been. But my biggest fear at that time was, would he love this kid? We're girls, we like babies, but I don't know, would he love this baby, right? And so he looked at me kind of like, you're such a dodo. And he goes, I said, well, what if we have a hard time loving him because he's handicapped? We never had anybody handicapped in our family. Nobody was sick in our family. And he kind of said, and this is why one of the reasons I love him so much, he said, we just have to love him more. Like, duh, And we knew that at about 32 weeks, I couldn't walk anymore. So that picture that you saw in my striped shirt, that was like the last few days I could walk. I was in a wheelchair up until 35 weeks because he was just so heavy, so big, and kind of painful. I bet it was painful for his head too. I begged for a delivery at 34 weeks. The OB was an MFM, pretty renowned MFM OB here in town. And she said, nah, it's not hydrocephalus, that bad of hydrocephalus. It's your polyhydramnios. I was like, I'm not polyhydramnios. My water's fine. I was trying to tell her, look at my ultrasound. And she was like, yeah, no, it's poly. So we're going to let you go as close to term as possible. And finally, I was like, could you please look at my ultrasound? And she actually looked at the films and she goes, oh, it is hydrocephalus. It's really bad hydrocephalus. Let's get him out. So it was kind of a turn of events really quick. So I had a lot of bitterness and anger towards her for quite a few weeks after that, even I would say up to a few months, and really had to work through that. Not know if that would ever, really even change the outcome, but there was a lot of struggle at that time. But the verse I have on there is actually a verse. Micah's, we call it his life verse, and we were trying to walk humbly with the Lord even during that time. And so we were told even before he was born, he may not swallow, he may not see, he may not hear, he may not urinate, he may just die at any time in utero, but also upon delivery. So we had that kind of from the 24 week on, just because he was so massive at the beginning. So I sat for my C-section, and as I was getting my spinal, I was telling the anesthesiologist, go a little higher. She's going to cut a little higher, do a high spinal, because I knew that it was going to be a pretty ginormous delivery. And I sounded a little crazy. I was kind of mumbling, and I was counting. At that moment, I remember God just impressed upon me. I was counting all the people we knew that were praying for us. We had a whole slew of people in the waiting room, but I just started counting because I was, a little nervous for first surgery. And she was like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, just counting people who care about us, And I kept on going and going. And Kenny was kind of just counting along with me when he got there. And we hit about 300 people by the time they got Mike out. And this was the beginning of how we would see how having a strong community, a strong faith community would really be really our bulwark for a very, very long time. So this picture is Kenny's first picture with a baby, the first daddy picture. He's trying to be brave. You can tell in his smile. I hadn't seen this kid. So he was taken from me, rushed to Children's. It was at St. Paul's back before it got tore down. And so I didn't see this kid for about 3 days. I was sedated on fentanyl drip. They wouldn't take me off of for a little while. So can you guys tell what this right-sided picture is? I had never seen anything like it. Can you see where their brain is? This is not a medical talk, so you don't have to answer if you don't want it, but We hadn't seen an MRI of his brain yet. I had had an intrauterine MRI, but once he was delivered, they were doing a lot of fast scans. They didn't know what was going on with his brain. They didn't know if it's obstructive, if it was overproduction. Everybody thinks it's obstructive. That's just kind of the first on the differential. So like, hey, they were tapping his fluid every day, you see a little kind of cut moon-shaped thing on his head. They put a reservoir in. They were taking out about 1 liter of fluid off his head a day. So they said, hey, this kid, we're not even feeding him. He may not last. They told us that almost every day. It was kind of interesting. Just, hey, be prepared, be prepared. They're really kind about it. They weren't crass about it or anything. But they had offered us palliative and just kind of comfort care only. Do you really want to feed him? Do you really want to give him IV fluids? Had I not done missions in China, I would not have known how big a head could be. This was the largest head up until this time at Children's, 68 FOC, 68 centimeters, so probably triple or double the size of normal heads. And so I'd seen one a lot larger in China, a couple quite big, one extremely large one, 10-year-old kid that just didn't die. And so I said, hey, we prayed about it. We're like, just continue to do supportive care. We'll just see what happens with this kid. So adults make about 250 cc's of spinal fluid a day. We make him absorb. So we were tapping 1 liter off him a day, sometimes a little more, liter and a half. It was really crazy. And so we found out at a month when they finally sedated him. They didn't think to sedate babies a lot for MRIs. That this was a fast scan. So if you see where the brain is, the white is just fluid. It's where the brain should be. So the brain is actually the very thin rim of gray around it. This is one of many scans. And later it gets better. And I wish I had a better picture to show you, but it wasn't much better. Even currently, it's not much better. So it's actually amazing what this kid can do these days, despite a brain like this. So what was found was he had a choroid plexus papilloma. These usually show up in 20 to 30-year-olds. He had his in the cerebellar, in the posterior fossa. Most of these are in the cerebrum area. So this was not expected. It was I don't have a picture of the tumor, but it was a 3 by 4 by 5 centimeter tumor by the time it was found. I actually had the surgeon, who's an amazing surgeon. We know he saved his life. He actually apologized to me and said, we're sorry we missed that. I was like, you do not need to apologize. You saved his life. So they went on to do surgery for him. Actually, initially they didn't find it. So at about a month, they ended up doing surgery for him when they did find it. And they told us even at that time it would be very treacherous. That's kind of our family fun word these days. That word treacherous was said so much by our doctor to prepare us. He wanted to be a realist. And so we said, just go ahead with the surgery, then we'll see what happens. I'll segue a little bit. When I did home visits as a faculty at Baylor Garland, I went to a home with a resident once. And it was a 30-year-old gentleman. He'd had a motorcycle accident a few years prior. His mom was a patient of ours. The patient was actually a patient of the residence. So I went in and I remember he was drooling. He was vented actually at home. He was drooling. We're visiting, very attentive family. Elderly mom was like wiping his drool. And he said something. He said in Spanish, he said, hijo de mi vida, son of my life. And I remember that phrase touched me so much. I kind of couldn't really put words to why it touched me so much. I mean, it was just very touching. She loved her son. She cared for him no matter what. And he was literally just almost a vegetable. His eyes were looking. He couldn't talk. He couldn't speak, but his mom took really good care of him. So I'll segue back so for my kid, as he was vented, I didn't know what would happen to him. Everybody was telling me he should die. And then also that he probably wouldn't be very functional, I just remembered we just felt overwhelmingly a little bit closer to God, because even though Micah was not suffering for anybody, he was our one and only son. He was hijo de mi vida, and even though he was suffering unintentionally, nobody willed it upon him that happened. We sensed a little bit more of God's great love for sending his son to intentionally die for us. So that was kind of a deep sense of the love of God in a way that we'd never really thought of or felt before. We deeply felt the presence of God in the NICU room. We're actually in the NICU for about 3 months. And so everybody was so sweet, so attentive. We just owed Children's everything. We had several opportunities, very interesting. So we just had overwhelming peace at that time when we were in the NICU. And it was really strange. We weren't like trying to share anything. We were just kind of being there, seeing what would happen to this kiddo. And several times, several people asked us, they're like, you guys are so at peace. And we're like, really? Oh, that's interesting. We don't know what's happening, but okay. And I realized during this time, like, a lot of us in medicine, maybe we like control. I'm probably top of the list, really like to be in control of all things. There was a lot of lack of control. And yet God's presence was so tangible and his peace was so overwhelming for us at that time. And we knew a lot of people were praying for us, but we had a lot of opportunity to share about God's love to some of the attendings and residents and fellows that actually came through the NICU. So this was his first outfit. He was actually a month old. We didn't know we could put clothes on him. Nobody actually said, you could put clothes on your baby. I came in on Halloween like yesterday, and I was like, he's in a pumpkin costume, and so it was just kind of ironic. But his fontanelle was huge. So you can actually, I just put this in, you can see sunset eyes. If y'all ever want to see sunset eyes on the right, that's what it is. You just can't see the top of the whites. He was like that. This was actually a really good picture because most of the time he was white eyes. It was kind of a little freaky when we were in the NICU. His head was super squishy. So you see the little V of this thing, the whole top is his fontanelle. So instead of a little tiny fontanelle, the whole top. And so you can see him like, that wasn't even that sunken, but it was like partly sunken. So we were initially discharged at 2 months, thinking he'd bypass, it was overproduction. So they took the tumor out, found out that it was actually still obstruction. So he came back for a VP shunt a month later. And so we didn't really have any expectations. We didn't know what to expect. Nobody could really tell us. So again, they told us he couldn't do all these things. He started passing his milestones. All the stuff he could see better, like he had bad vision early because of sunset eyes, but it got better. He was urinating fine. We had a nurse about a month into it said, how come you haven't fed him? We're like, no one told us we could feed him. She started with a syringe and he went chomp, 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 chomp. And so he did go home on an NG tube, which he self-DC'd the first day when we got home. We're all learning, we're medical, but I never placed an NG. We had to put it, take it out, put it, take it out. Got it all done, and then he pulled it the first day. But when we got home, one of the things our families came and visited, our friends, especially our church friends. We lived across the street from our church, Asian American Baptist Church in Richardson at the time. And we just had a lot of traffic. So people were not scared of us. That's one thing I think for chronically ill families. I think a lot of people get scared of them or just kind of don't know what to say, what to do. But our friends were really cool. They just treated us like we were our normal selves, even with a pretty handicapped baby, even though we were kind of nervous about a lot of things, they just kept on coming. And during this time, I reflected how I used to look at handicapped families and feel kind of sorry for them. I don't know if y'all, sometimes I still kind of feel it, but then I'm like, wait, I've had a different experience. And so what it was is that I just thought, surely they have a hard life. Surely they're just suffering through it, those poor things, So either they must be really kind of sorrowful and burdened all the time, or they just have to grin and bear it, because this is something they got to live with all the time, right? But by the grace of God, I think very early in Micah's time, we felt more loved by God, by our spiritual family, by our friends. We felt we had more rejoicing over very little things because we started seeing things in a very different light, not just stuff Micah could do, because it took a long time for him to even be able to do anything, but just more thankfulness. And it was a very strange kind of dichotomy at the time, a lot of stressors and yet an overwhelming sense of the goodness of God. And I'll say that for many of us, probably at some of our times of suffering or our times of real challenge, maybe the times that we actually sense God's presence more. I'll get into that a little bit more later, but we had a lot of challenges. So we didn't know how to position him because we couldn't hold him up. He couldn't hold his head up. So not even just as a newborn, like even as he got older, up until 8 months. After 8 months, I couldn't hold him anymore. I couldn't lift him by myself. He was a 2-person lift just because his head was so big and so floppy, so squishy. We had a hard time. They told us he'll never travel in a car seat. There is no car seat big enough for his head that would be stable. There's something called a car bed. It's really cool, but really clunky. Like you could not do it by yourself. I couldn't go grocery shopping with him, or I couldn't go visit a friend and push him around in a park, just because it was such a clunky device. And so I told Kenny one day, I said, we just got to go to Bye Bye Baby. We'd never even been to Bye Bye Baby with him. It's like, what do you want to go to Bye Bye Baby for? I said, I don't know. I just feel like we need to go to Bye Bye Baby. I just want to look at all the car seats. He's like, you're going to try him in a car seat? I was like, just do it. And we prayed as we went. I was like, we don't really have a lot of time with this kid. This kid's, he's very fragile. We don't want to do a lot with him. His first time out, actually. And we said, hey, God, if there is a car seat for us, could you help us find it really quick? We actually prayed that. I prayed that before walking in. And no joke, we walked in, this girl in the picture, she walked up and said, can I help you? She kind of looked at her kid like, oh. And I said, this picture does not do it justice. His head is actually, he has more bossing. He's like a coney head, like, the cone heads from SNL or something. So we walked in, and the first associate, she said, there's something that might work. There's a new thing called Orbit Baby. I think it might work. She wheeled this wheelchair up, or this car seat up, and we put him in it. And I was like, the thing clamped his helmet exactly perfectly. We had a little neck pillow, totally off-label use. We've done a lot of off-label stuff. If you guys ever need any help fitting somebody in a device of some sort with foam. We got every piece of foam that was ever made by man in our house. So we kind of like did this. I strapped him in and I was like, it worked. First car seat ever. We just took that baby, we walk right out. So lots of stories like that, little things that were just amazing. So this is our guy that did our helmet. He is our hero, just a hero. Gentle, unassuming man. He's done so much for so many kids. He's not just a helmet guy, he's an orthotist. And his name's Dwayne, and a dear friend of ours now. He called himself the upside down man because he looks at kids all upside down. He did Micah had about 8 or 9 helmets. Plagiocephaly should be out of that, by under a year, 18 months max. But that's nobody ever hits that benchmark. We were in it for 2.5 years. And so he did multiple ulcer prevention, ulcer treatment, redos of helmets just to keep Micah's head stable, just so the fontanelle would eventually grow and the plates would close. Otherwise, he'd be squishy head forever. So we met a lot of amazing people. He's a guy that fostered over 100. He and his wife have fostered over 120 kids and still doing it. So just a really amazing guy. We met a few nurses there's one nurse that met us at Arch Clinic. If y'all ever do rotations there, the underweight clinic, our 14-pounder made it to the underweight clinic because he was IUGR. And the first nurse there, our first day of visit, said, your kid probably needs a suction machine. And I said, what suction machine? He goes, like the wall suction, except you need a suction machine because he has no neck control. You're going to need to suck him. That suction machine, we still have it 9 years into it, has saved us many a hospital visit because low tone kids, they can't express their mucus a lot. If they get sick, a lot of times they get some respiratory distress. So we're able to keep them out and do some deep suctioning and different things at home just because people bothered along the way to give us a few extra, pointers and care. So I don't have many more pictures about Micah, but this is one just showed us families that just are friends that just loved on us and just were normal with us. So we had 5 friends, us included, we're one of the 5, had 5 boy babies all at once. These are like our close friends, people that we hang out all the time with. So I don't know how we all ended up with boys this one year, but we did. And so you can't see anybody in there, but Mike is the one on the right, obviously, with the helmet. But all of these are good friends. And the little boy in the bottom left, he's now a huge guy, a bruiser, but his name's Silas. And he always asks me about Micah, whether I'm with Micah or not. He sees me with Micah. He's something about him. He has a soft spot for Micah. And when he was about 5, one day we went to a party without him. And he said, where's Micah? I said, oh, he's at home. Thanks for asking. And he goes, of course. I said, you always remember to ask, Silas. That's so sweet of you. He goes, well, he's my friend. Mike has never spoken 2 words to him besides hi and bye. And but these 5 kind of grew up together. And the guy in the middle, one of the helmeted guys, he face mask guys, is one of our good friends, one of our best friends. He, for about 5 years, while Kenny still worked in the ER, Kenny no longer works now, stays at home with the kids, came over every day. He's a house dad with his kids home. He came over every day and lifted Micah twice a day because Micah, after 8 months, was a double lift. And so before we got our lift machine. And so he came over twice a day so we could get Micah in a wheelchair, out of a wheelchair, until Kenny could get home from his shift. So we've just been so blessed with friends that have loved us. That's kind of the mechanics of it. But then the woman on the right, I was in missions with for about 2 years. She's a long-term missionary now, retired for missions, but her name is Marilyn. She's a pharmacist. She flew in to see us when she was on furlough one year. And she held him. And I remember saying, I just said to Marilyn, she's one of the most spiritually mature people I know. I said, how do handicapped kids know Jesus? How do I know that Micah, that he'll know Jesus? And she just looked at me kind of like, can't believe you said that. She goes, Jesus knows him, Christine. That's all she said. And that was one of the most precious times that it was a kind of a thing that was lingering in my mind. I didn't know how to ask that, but she was able to answer that with a really encouraging word. One of the things, we met a lot of friends along the way. These are a lot of our good friends, but we formed a hydrocephalus walk. It's across the nation. So once a year in October, there's a walk for fundraising. So these are some of our good friends, just to show a portion of the support that we have. I don't think everybody can fit in the picture, but every year we have a huge turnout for that fundraising for a walk here in DFW. We have a lot of families that join. So if you guys ever, this is just a segue, but if you guys ever have family members or patients even who have chronic disease, really encourage them to get plugged into support groups. So we meet up with a hydrocephalus group once a year, but we've made a lot of connections in between. We encourage one another on Facebook. We call each other if our kids get a surgery or going through something, and we just encourage one another. It is so awesome just to know other people maybe going through something similar, or if not similar, at least they understand. That's really really huge. So we saw continued kindness from people, from the Lord through people around us our whole time, these 9 years. And so we need people. We cannot do this alone. We can't do our regular lives alone, but especially when we have suffering, especially if we're going through hardships. I found that is the time to really, for us to reach out, but for those of us who aren't suffering in the moment, to really be reaching out to those around us. So that was my question. One day this thing was still kind of on my mind. So this was Mike was a little older, and we were changing Mike's diaper because it takes two of us now to change his diaper. We're changing his diaper, and I said to my husband, I was like, you know, how will I know that Micah will know God? Right? I'm still perseverating on this topic, right? And my husband says, of course he'll know God. Like he was kind of like, just let it go. What's the big deal? But God is so faithful. When we have questions, just even things that linger that seems like everybody else got it, but we don't get it, right? In the midst of it, God immediately gave me two verses. And isn't that cool how he does that? One of the verses was Matthew 19:14. He reminded me that he is close to the little ones because they have pure hearts. He said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And just to make sure I got it, he gave me one back to back. And this is before the diaper was changed. I had to go look up the reference. I just remember the part of it. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. So over the course of the first few years of Micah's life, he did really well, actually, up until he was about 18, 20 months. Even though he had major motor issues because he couldn't lift his head, we did a lot of PT, OT, speech, and all the other stuff, ECI, and all the private, public, insurance that we got. We did as much therapy as we could at home. He developed good hearing. He actually had good speech. He was actually on par with like 18, 20-month-olds at that time. He just couldn't hold his head up. So he became a wheelchair, kid. Then right about 18 months, up until about 20 months, we finally got diagnosed. He's developed infantile spasms. If you guys remember, like two really bad, when the neurologist gave me that diagnosis after his EEG, we're just like, oh, he goes, you remember that from med school? I was like, not really, just remembered it was bad and it was intractable and it's hard to cure. And he goes, that's it. And so it started us on a long route, multiple meds, multiple therapies, multiple EEGs. Like it was just this kind of incessant. Every month we're doing something for him for quite a while, drug studies, all sorts of things. It's a pretty crazy seizure. So basically it's an encephalopathy. So he lost a lot of the milestones that he got. He used to have a really good hand dexterity, hand-eye coordination. It comes and goes because it's encephalopathy, and sometimes we get the meds just right. Sometimes the weather's just right. Sometimes things just align, and he does great for a couple months. Right now we're kind of in a lull where he's having multiple seizures a day still. So he started having his regression, but he would get a few words back, lose some, gain some skills back. And so he is now currently a full assist, all ADLs. He was at a point he was beginning to feed himself. He's lost that. So he's a full feed on 4 drug seizure meds right now. So you guys know more than 2 is pretty bad. He's on 4, still not controlled. He's on a ketogenic diet, awesome. Cut back a lot of seizures for him. But kind of that's our status, and that's our status quo. This is what we live with. So we're used to this, but that's why I kind of look at for him. So for ketogenic people who are compensated metabolic acidosis, if they get a respiratory illness, they actually decompensate pretty fast. So we used to live every other month in the winter. I would live at Children's. I would actually go to work from Children's, stay with Ken before he had Abby, stay with Kenny, get up and go, go to work from Children's. So we lived a lot at Children's, but so that's why I look the fool. Those who've seen me on campus know I wear ridiculous gear right now until our kids get vaccinated, but that's the life that we live. So, but we're grateful we actually have a daytime nurse for him. And my in-laws are over every day. So we have a lot of good support. But I just wanted to mention that throughout the time that we've had him, there have been a lot of ups and downs. A lot of times we really don't know what to do for him. And we're medical people. My husband's an ER nurse. I'm a family med. We kind of know the how-tos as much as I would say probably most people would know. But there were a lot of low times in our journey too. So it wasn't like, oh, we just got it all. We really didn't. There's one time, and I'll just share this one last story, and then there's a few other things I just wanted to highlight from Abby's story. But we had a few low times. There was one time I just had my C-section with from Abby actually, and it was a kind of a bad one. So first one was really bad. Second one was almost as bad. A lot of complications. So I was recovering from that. Kenny was feeding Micah before now has a G tube, but before he had a G tube, sometimes it would take up to 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours if the seizures are bad. Good, eat your food in 15 minutes. Bad, it could be 2 to 3 hours, and he had to get all the seizure meds in him, right? So he had to eat it with his food. And so it was just really bad. Kenny was tired. I couldn't sit very long to feed him. We are just like really exhausted. And I remember my mom said in Chinese, I don't know what prompted her to say this crazy thing. She said to me, she says, "你们配的, you guys are worthy." And I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? She goes, "You're worthy. God found you worthy to have Micah." Wrong thing to say, wrong time. Mom, wrong time. I remember I never flipped out on my mom. That was the time I was like, what the heck are you talking about? We're not worthy. Who's worthy to see their kids suffer? But who's worthy? I mean, we don't have the ability to sustain this. We're not worthy. We're not able. We're at the end of our rope. And it was like just a really like, really pretty crazy time. And my mom was like, just remember what I said. I'm going home. Don't spaz out. I'm going home. So it was one of those times. And I remember just going, what in the world prompted her to say that? It would come back to me later. There's a song I want to share. Not the song, but if you guys have heard this on the radio, Mercy Me is a great music group. Their songs really touched me. Probably every other song, I'm like, these guys, Bart, he knows suffering. He wouldn't be writing like this if he didn't, and it talks about the faithfulness of God, that he's been faithful and he's been good all of our days. And come what may, that we would cling to him. And he says this, and it comes from, from Daniel's friends who got thrown into the, in the fire, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said, even if you don't rescue us, they would still honor and hope in God. So this is a song that recently it's just hit the radio. It's been in the radio for a while, but it recently touched me again. And let me segue. It was a little bit of a segue, but so remember we have a normally developing 6-year-old, six going on 16, very precocious. So one of the things in our family we don't say, it's a pet peeve of mine. I don't like the phrase, "It's not fair." She kind of hit the "it's not fair" a little earlier, I think, than the average kid. She started saying that at about age 3. So the first time I heard her say it, she's like, "It's not fair about this or that toy, or whatever." But there's one day she said, "It's not fair" relative to Micah. And the reason I told her, I said, we do not say it's not fair is because we don't want to make a comparison of ourselves, our situation with others, because that doesn't glorify God, right? Sometimes it's hard for us adults to kind of be able to manage that, much less a kid. But one time she said, "Gaga," she says, "Gaga, big brother, it's not fair." She was only 3. She said, it's not fair. Gaga cannot walk or play. I really want to play with him. And it's not fair that I can't play with him. And notice how it's not fair for him quickly got translated to, it's not fair for me, like the self-pity. I have nobody to play with at home, right? So we'd been anticipating talking to her about why it's not fair or fair, what it means about Micah, but we just didn't think it would be at 3. So a verse came to mind. I didn't know what to say. I didn't expect it. It was a few years earlier. And the Lord gave me another verse, and he says, "Indeed, there are those who are last who will be first, and first who will be last." And I was reminded that things are opposite in the kingdom of God. I know God is always fair, but I had to wrestle with, how is God always fair? What does that mean? He's just, he's righteous. What does that mean? Even when situations are seemingly not fair in our own human eyes. So the deeper questions, right, that we all probably have asked, probably wrestle with, maybe intermittently still wrestle with, right? Why is there suffering, especially for the innocent? Do you not care, God? Where are you? Are you not there for them? When my kid has seized for the 10th time today, are you there, God? Right? What did they do to deserve the suffering that they got dished out? Right? Some people deserve it. Some people did some bad stuff and they got something and they kind of caused it. But Micah didn't, right? So it's kind of fair for Abby to say it's not fair in her 3-year-old mind, right? Maybe in our human mind, we might say that's kind of like a reasonable thing to say, right? Christine, why'd you slam your dog against him? But why would you tell her don't say that? That's kind of a fair thing to say. She's being honest, right? And even deeper, God, did you do it? Did you do that, God? I thought of all the things, we got on a mission trip when I was pregnant with him. I was like, did I eat roots when I was in Burma? Did that cause a CMV? Like I was wrestling through all that. Like I didn't have CMV. It was a tumor. But then the deeper question is, God, not only did you allow that, but did you cause that? Whoa, those are kind of scary things to ask. Those are kind of scary things to think, right? So God gave me this verse, and this answered it for me. This is a deep life verse for me. Indeed, there are those who are last who will be first, and first who will be last. Weird verse to think of. The Holy Spirit, really, God gives us verses when we gives us his living and active word when we don't know what to say. So this is the good news in summary. I'm going to share a few thoughts. Okay. I explained it to this girl at 3 in kid words, but this is the gist of what I said to her. And all this did not come from me. This came as the Lord was telling me. God wanted all things to be perfect and good, right? When he created the world, it was perfect. The initial world that he created, he gave us free will. He loved us, so he gave us free will. He lets us choose right or wrong, good or bad, follow him or not follow him. He's the source of all good things, right? So suffering does come because we chose, human beings chose to do their own thing for a little while. And when we do anything apart from what's good and holy and right, there's darkness. So darkness entered the world, right? So badness entered the world. Death and suffering entered in the world. We may not directly cause things like Micah's tumor. Like I didn't make the tumor, put it in him. I didn't cause it like that. But because there's death and suffering, our bodies are all breaking down. There's some way that we're going to go in one way or another, right? Some things are directly causative. Some things are not directly causative, like in Micah's situation. There's sickness and disease because the world was supposed to be run by perfect people who turned imperfect. So the things that we were in charge of suffered too. So our care of the world, our care of nature, our care of the natural order of things was also damaged. So the world was broken because man became broken. So if God is the source of all good things and there's nothing good apart from him, if we make a wrong choice, then we are apart from him. And God knew that we were separated from him and we could not talk with him or walk with him or know him as well anymore. But he wanted to make a way for us to know him. So he himself sent his one and only son on earth to die for us so that he would pay for our sin so that we could know God again, so we could be washed clean and know him again. So I explained that to my daughter at that time. She was only 3. She recognized sin. She knew what sin was. It was really interesting. 3, you don't have to, at 2, probably even under 2, she knew. You could see sin nature just developing in a young, cute child. It just happens, But because she posed the challenge of a seemingly unfair God to me, she actually understood the explanation. It took a little while, but she just literally 10 or 15 minutes, she got it. She actually prayed and accepted Christ that day. It was kind of interesting. But it begged the deeper questions that we've asked, probably all of us at one point. Why is there suffering? Because there's sin and death in the world. Does God care? Yeah, he does. He cared so much, he sent his one and only son to die for us. And we don't always deserve the suffering. But get this is his other answer. We know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. So beside being comforted, knowing that God had Micah close to his heart, each of us close to his heart, he continued to show me how much he loved Micah, how much he loves every one of us. And then I'm going to just share something along this line that God was showing me at that time. For those of you that might be parents or just be around little kids, and you just look at a little kid and they're just so cute. You just like naturally gravitate to little kids. Little kids are just sweet. And if you have kids of your own, you're just like, I look at my kid, I just love you, right? So I look at my son. Micah is my baby, right? You look at babies, they're just cute. We just call him our big baby. He's our big boy. He is hijo de mi vida. He will never play the piano. He will never go to Harvard. He will never become a physician. He will never do great things in the eyes of the world. So God was showing me something really deep. He said, Christine, I love you like that. You don't have to do one stinking thing for me. Micah poops in his diaper. Sometimes he eats his food. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he says mama. Recently he hasn't. Sometimes he says baba for daddy. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he says happy. A lot of times that used to be one of his favorite words. He hasn't said it very much recently. And yet I don't love him any less than my normally developing daughter. I just love him. My heart is filled with him. He has to suffer my kisses and my hugs and my snuggling. Love language, not touch for him, but he has to suffer them for me, okay? Because I just love him, right? And so that was the deeper thing that God was showing us, showing me as we had this on. So my encouragement to you guys too, and if this hopefully is a blessing to you to know that. I know a lot of us, we already know that, but God does not need us to do anything for him. This was a very counterculture for us in medicine, right? Because we're all there. We all want to serve and and there is nothing wrong with that. He wants us to live fully for him, to use every skill, everything that we have for him. But a lot of times there's a lot of striving in our lives. And God in this time was just reminding me that I can do nothing, and I am his child. And from that, knowing that I'm his child, will come the energy and the strength to do things for him out of love for him, not out of earning anything from him. So he is constantly redeeming and changing us. So this segment, I'll let you guys kind of glance over it. I know a lot of y'all know this one. This segment in Isaiah speaks of God using us to bring him glory, even as he's transforming us. So by default, we will bring him glory, no matter how we do it. By being children of God, we walk with him, we'll bring him glory. He's transforming us from brokenness to beauty. In the very end, so he's saying the Spirit of the Lord, this Isaiah is saying, was upon him to do a lot of things. This is out of God's Spirit in him, out of knowing who he was in Christ. This is the overflow. But ultimately, it was to be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. He is allowing suffering to persist. He's allowing suffering to persist because he wants to give us all a chance to turn to him, for those that don't know him yet, for more to be able to know him. That's another aspect of what's going on with this world that seems so crazy and crazier each day. We just see craziness in the world, in the news every day. There will be a time when suffering will end, when God says enough is enough. He'll do away with evil and injustice because he is a just God. He will not suffer this forever. There will also be a time where no more people can turn to him. So all the ones that will turn to him will have turned to him. All the ones who would have accepted his gift of grace, of salvation, would have done that. In his mercy, he is waiting. In the waiting, he's still showing up in the midst of our lives, doing healing, doing renewing, doing transforming. So this is part of Abby's story. It's kind of a messy picture. So in our family, we love the Saints football, because my husband grew up in New Orleans. I went to school in Louisiana. So we talk Saints, Warriors basketball, because I'm from California, go Dubs, and also Saints. So we're a mixed family here. But Abby, we used to love to sing the song "When the Saints Go Marching In." You guys probably know that song. "When the Saints go marching in, how I want to be in that number when the Saints go marching in." Right? I don't know. We just sang that song because we love Saints and everything Saints. We have a ton of fleur de lis around our house and all this other stuff. So when Abby knows the Bible pretty well, we've gone through the Bible probably about 4 times. Kitty Bible 4 times, 4 different versions. So she gets like, older kid version each time. But so one day she said, "Mom, that's not really right." This is when she was about 5, and I said, "What do you mean it's not right?" She goes, "The Bible says that we're going to meet him in the air. When Jesus comes, we're not going to be marching. We're going to be flying. That's wrong. That song's wrong." And I was like, "All right, let's sing flying in then. Why don't we say flying?" And she goes, "Okay, I like that. Oh, when the saints go flying in." So that's what we're doing for a while. And then one day she goes, "What if I'm playing? If I'm playing and Jesus comes and then I'm flying, like, will I still be playing?" I'm like, "I don't know. I know you'll be flying. Maybe you'll be playing." So we made this song up and we go, "Fla-playing." So if you're playing and Jesus comes, you'll be fla-playing in. She goes, "Well, Mommy, if you're washing dishes, you're going to be fla-washing in." So we laugh about this. This comes up every once in a while. So there's one day she draws Micah a ton of pictures. This was when she was about 5, about a year ago. It's a little messy. I asked her, I said, "Interpret this for me. What's going on here?" And she said, "Well, that's me laying down in the black dress, sleeping with Aziz. And I'm dreaming." I go, "Okay, what are you dreaming?" She goes, "So there's me in the dress." I'm like, you're she goes, "Well, that's the dream. I'm in the rainbow dress." And I said, "Oh, it says Jesus' throne. Where's it?" She goes, "It's behind me in the yellow, the line. That's Jesus' throne." I'm like, "Oh, Jesus' throne. Okay." And I said, "What's that?" She goes, "The thing in the middle." She goes, "That's a bubble. That's what Micah's saying." I was like, "Oh, what's he?" Micah doesn't talk very much, right? Micah's saying King of King and Lord of Lords. And nobody told her to draw this picture. This was not something that we planned. And anyway, I was like, "What's that thing in the middle?" She goes, "That's his wheelchair." I was like, "Okay." I was like, "What's Micah doing?" She goes, "Well, he's standing there praising God." I was like, "Okay." And then Jesus is on the side. So Jesus in the purple on the side. Micah's standing before the throne. And there's Abby. This is one of my favorite pictures she's ever drawn. So in our song, Micah is flying. So there's one thing, one time she asked me, she goes, "Well, what will Gogo be doing?" He doesn't do much. He sits there. I said, "Well, he'll be flying." And she goes, "Without his wheelchair?" I said, "He won't be flying with his wheelchair. He'll be flying without the wheelchair." So that's something she really loves. She draws a lot of pictures, actually. And we never told her to draw him out of his wheelchair. She never draws him in his wheelchair. She always will draw a wheelchair, but he will always be out of the wheelchair. And he'll be doing something, playing with her, or doing some other thing. But it's very interesting. There's a vision for me on that. And that vision is, as we see Jesus face to face, you know how we say the first will be last and the last will be first? So the saints marching or flying in, right? That vision for me is that, and Abby gets this, we've talked about this. We said, if the last will be first, good goes always last, right? That's kind of not fair. She goes, yeah, that's kind of not fair. Good goes always last. He doesn't get to do anything. He doesn't get to eat yummy foods. He doesn't get to play. He doesn't get to, kind of not fair, right? She goes, yeah. I said, but God is always fair. She goes, well, how's that? I said, well, in heaven, I don't know, but I think the ones that were last are going to go first. We're going to see them ahead. She goes, well, and I know what she wanted to say. She wanted to say, that's not fair. I don't want to be behind. I said, but wait, you get to watch him. Oh, she goes, yeah, I get to watch him flying. I said, yeah, we get to watch him flying. And you know what? Even though we're further behind because we got to go first in this life, we're going to be behind, but we get to watch him flying ahead of us next to Jesus. And all his hydrocephalus friends and all the friends who've suffered more in this life, they're going to be closer to Jesus. She goes, she's still thinking about that. I said, but how cool would that be? We get to see it happening. She's like, yeah, I would love to see Coco fly. We had a friend, I had a patient, a handicapped patient died this last year, very close friend and patient of mine. I asked Abby to draw a picture for the parents. The boy died. The boy was about 30, highly handicapped. Our family's really connected, and he died just suddenly. And she drew a picture, and I didn't get to give it to them at the funeral, but later I gave it to him, and I said, just draw a picture for our friend Toby's parents, And she said, was he in a wheelchair? He was the one in the wheelchair. I said, yeah, she never met him. So she drew the same thing. I didn't tell her what to draw. I said, just draw a picture. I'd written a card. She wanted to do something and draw a picture. So she did the same thing. She drew Toby with Jesus. This is no joke. Like it touched me so much. I gave it to the parents. They were really like, whoa, in her like 5.5-year-old like picture writing. She drew Toby with Jesus and his wheelchair was behind. And the family were all watching Toby with Jesus. And so that was the picture that she gave them. Revelation 7:17 says, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes. One last thought, and I'm sorry I'm taking up. I didn't think I would talk that long, but the verse recently came to me. Whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, it should say, do it for the glory of God. So I want to live a life worthy of God's glory. I started to think about this. This is how it ties in for suffering in light of glory. That if we do everything, if I'm with my son as he is suffering, if we're with people, or if we personally are suffering, we can choose to suffer and just suffer it, right? Grin and bear it and get through it. Or we can think of how can we, in our suffering, to either cling to him, to glorify him. Sometimes we don't know how we do this. It's not like we're doing this intentionally all the time. But I want to do it in such a way. I want to live this short life that I have, even in the midst of suffering, to bring maximal glory to my God. I can do it. I can stick my head in the sand and just suffer it, but I would miss out. So he would still love me the same, but I would miss out on something. I miss out on recognizing his goodness. His goodness is always there, whether I choose to recognize it or not. I would miss out on allowing him to transform me through the circumstance. I would miss out on the sweetness of fellowship with him in the process. I would miss out on seeing his glory in the midst of my suffering. So we are not always the spiritual. A lot of times it can be really kind of down and dirty. But overall, my husband and I, every night, we purpose to be thankful for something, to praise God for something. And in the midst of our suffering, that has been a sustaining grace. And we've sensed and known and sensed the presence of God more deeply in the last couple of years than we've ever had. So I'll leave it. We shall draw near to God, not by trying to avoid the sufferings inherent in all loves, but by accepting them and offering them to him, throwing away all defensive armor. If our hearts need to be broken, and if he chooses this as the way in which he should break it, so be it. For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever.